place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. This is episode 1003 of Living Free in Tennessee. And it's a Tuesday show, so y'all know this doubles as the Living Free podcast. And I reached out to Isaac Morehouse to see if he would come on the show because he hasn't been on in a while. I think the last time we talked was shortly after Unloose the Goose started. So
yes.
Yep, there's been a lot of changes since then. So we're going to talk about what's, like who and what is an Isaac Morehouse, as well as his walk to freedom and how different decision points come up along the way. He's also a serial entrepreneur, as I recall, always got something brewing in the background, and he has the follow through to get it done. He's very good at working with people. So I think you're going to really love this show. If you want to get a question in, put the word question in all caps and I'll star it, or comment the word comment in all caps and I'll star it to see if we can work it into the show. Before we introduce Isaac, though, what I want to do today is talk about the featured event. And our featured event of today's show is the Seed Exchange and Potluck at my place this coming Saturday, 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Bring a dish to share if you have one. If you don't let that keep you from coming. There's going to be plenty of food. And same with the seeds. I have a bunch of seeds to share out. If you have seeds you want to trade, that's great. If you don't have any seeds and need seeds, this would be a good place to come. Check out all of that at livingfreeintennessee.com. I also have two sponsors to thank today. Our first sponsor is Holler Roast Coffee. That's right. It's my own business. And we have a new product that just launched today in honor of Valentine's Day. It's the dark chocolate espresso bites. That's right.
Oh, those are dangerous.
Apparently, I got to mail some to Isaac, and they are here seasonally only, partially because limited supplies and pain in the neck to make, but also shipping chocolate in the United States after about the end of March without overnight shipping and ice is a really bad idea. So those are in stock now, and you can get them at hollerroast.com. Our second sponsor of today's show is Above Phone. Check out abovephone.com to learn all about keeping control of your data on your cell phone. Imagine having a spy-free situation set up on your phone. You can get those devices at abovephone.com, and they know that changing your habits from an iPhone or an Android can be really hard. So they include an hour of free consulting when you buy those devices. Go to abovephone.com. If you use the coupon code LivingFreeTN, you get $50 off a device. And now we get to the meat of the show, and that's introducing Isaac. Isaac, how are you?
Good. Great to be here. By the way, your intro with that sheep like chewing, it's so weirdly relaxing. I was just kind of, this is so calming. I could just watch this. It's like, what do they call that? ASMR, where you just listen to whatever So well done there.
Oh, thank you. Totally stock video from Canva, but I added the popcorn sound, and I got an email shortly after that. I hate the sound of chewing. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really like listening to people chew either.
But something about a sheep, it's so absurd looking. I don't know. It worked for me.
Yeah. I have this idea that I'm going to change that every month to have some other stock footage there. And that idea came 6 months ago. And not surprisingly, we have the same stock footage in that intro.
Okay, it's a brand. But by the way, I got to shout out your sponsor. Holler Roast is awesome. Big fan. I don't know about the chocolate covered espresso beans because, like I said, those are dangerous. It's like you pop them in and they're so easy, and you don't know how many you've had. And then for me, I don't want to. I start floating. I'm shaking. I've had 100 of them and I'm levitating. So careful with those. That's all.
Imagine what it's like to have 20 pounds on hand. I was telling because I have a roasting assistant, and I was like, so I'm not allowed to come to the shack hungry anymore. And I only package these when I'm in a good headspace because I don't want to be, no.
Well, actually, that's a good question. I want to ask you this because this is something that I think about a lot. And this goes very much to our topic about like creating the life you want, living free. There's lots of kinds of freedom, and you can easily start to feel enslaved to something that you did in a way to make you free at a starting point. So when it comes to a hobby or something you're passionate about, like roasting coffee or even growing vegetables or making sourdough bread, And then you're like, hey, this is cool. I'll kind of turn this into a business that's very entrepreneurial. It gives me this flexibility and freedom. Is there some level at which you say, I don't want it to be any bigger than this because now I'm starting to feel like a slave to it? Like, do you ever feel like I got to put a cap on it because, I mean, just that ambition to grow a business, at least I know for me, sometimes can take you to a place where you're like, I've grown it into a lifestyle that I don't even enjoy anymore because it's so demanding. Do you face that decision with some of the things you're doing?
My whole podcast exists because I did that to myself with the Spark Freedom nonprofit, right? I was like, I love coaching people. I love teaching people. I can help them find their brand message. And I'm going to work with a bunch of libertarians to bring story to policy solutions, which was surprisingly difficult to do. And then, I mean, they're doing a great job now, but I was like, so I built myself into a leader of a nonprofit organization focused on raising money to pay for services that I didn't even get to deliver, that I invented, that other people delivered not as well as I did. Like, that was like the day I realized what I'd done. I was driving to a trade show bawling in the car. And I'm like, I have to go pretend like I care about what I'm doing. And all I do is like, paperwork, raise money, which is not terrible. I don't mind asking for money and telling the story. And I don't even get to do the fun parts anymore. Like I got to deal with HR issues and accounting and reporting and grant writing and all this stuff. So with Holler Roast, I've also faced that. In 2020, I toured Black Rifle Coffee. They let me come see their factory, which is in Tennessee.
Nice.
Super, super nice. And I looked at the factory, and when I was about 16 years old, I worked for a company called Hoodie Corporation that manufactured peanuts. And my dad was the plant manager there, so I had sort of an in on the job. But then when you're the daughter of the plant manager, you got to do more work because everybody thinks you're getting special treatment. And I looked at the equipment, and I'm like, that bagging machine, do you have to repair that every 3 days? She's like, yes, it's the biggest pain in the neck. I'm like, it was in the peanut factory too. And I realized if I grew Holler Roast to that size, I was going to end up being a plant manager. Yep. And so I decided to keep it boutique. And at the point where I get enough like so many customers that it's going to have to go to something that level, we're not doing that. Yep. And I that's when I, from there, I ended up burning my roaster, doing the Kickstarter, getting the new commercial roaster, setting up the building here. And I'm like, that's it. And I'm perfectly happy to set up an outsourced drop ship wholesale coffee that's not the stuff I roast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I always have this tension because one of my greatest passions in life is helping other people like realize theirs and overcome obstacles to a life that maybe they didn't think they could have, or like live more free. And so I always like see all this potential, and I want everyone to like go do this and go do that. And there are times when I've come across somebody, like you might find a bakery in a small town, and I've come across this many times, that is so popular. They open at like 7 a.m, and then they're closed at like 11, and they sell everything out, and then that's it. And I have talked with people who run businesses like that, and maybe it's only like 4 days a week, and they're like, it's perfect. I'm happy. I get to come in and do my baking. I get to see everybody. I sell everything. I make enough money. I'm happy. And I'm always like, okay, that's good. But I have this vision of like, what else it could be? What if you franchise? What if you, and it's interesting because like those things can be at war. And even when it comes to things that you believe deeply in and are passionate about, advancing freedom and then kind of becoming further removed. Like if you get obsessed with the effectiveness question, which I think is an important question. Say you want to make the world more free. You want to help other people live more free. You start asking what's the most effective way to do that. And that is a good question to be responsible and to not just like hope that your good intentions are good enough and go do things that might actually be destructive for the world. But it can also lead you insane and like lead you to a point where you are no longer free. And so I've always talked about like, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish versus like raise the money to buy the land, to build the factory, to make the rope, to make the nets, to help people catch millions of fish, right? It's like so leveraged. It's so much more, even though it's far removed from that end result. And I don't think any of that is bad, but you can get to a point where you start to be so disconnected, like you mentioned, where like fundraising wasn't really, you really liked working with the people and the programs directly. And it's like, well, maybe what I'm doing is more effective, but I've kind of lost the soul in it. I've lost the part that I loved. And being able to come back to that without feeling guilty, or even doing something that doesn't have anything to do with if you're working in the free market, if you're doing something commercially viable, that's people are paying you more than it costs to produce it as an employee, as an owner, whatever. I don't care what it is, selling widgets. That is a good thing. You are doing something valuable and productive in the world. And like, you can have a job that doesn't directly relate to your passion. Now, it's great if you can do both, but I think there's sometimes people who get really excited about the ideas that you and I are excited about. You can get into this weird trap where you're like guilty that you have to be doing some sort of business or some way of living. And you end up being like, well, I'm trying to help people live free, but I'm not free myself. And I know you and I talked about this last time, living in DC and watching all these people trying to like make the world more free, and their personal lives, they were complete prisoners to the horrible cost of living and quality of life in DC. And they like had these little prison cell lives while they're working for organizations trying to make people free. So anyway, I think a series of questions and about trade-offs that we all have to ask ourselves in our individual lives, first and foremost.
That's actually why when I work with people, I push them towards a life strategic plan that is not based in what they produce as a business, but describes what they want from life. Because when you get that really nailed down, it will change throughout your life. Because you and I both know that, you set your vision and you're like, nah, I don't like that, so I'm going to adjust it. And that's fine, because life is a journey, not a destination. But if you start there, then you can evaluate what you're doing through that lens a little better, which is how I was able to actually admit that bringing Hollow Roast to a factory setting was a terrible idea, because I totally would have gone there. Yep. Totally would have gone there had I not done that. But I also know people who run rather large businesses who don't love it, and they work hard at it. And they're like, but I make so much money that when I'm not working, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And that's a legitimate formula. And if you're clear on what your goals are in life and what you want for your life, then okay, well, I'm a lawyer or whatever, and I make a ton of money when I'm billing, and I don't love the actual law part that I'm doing, but I get vacations,
Completely. Well, this is a funny it's a funny topic, because I think the last time you and I talked, I was still running Crash, the kind of career job seeker startup that I had spun off of one of my startups that was connected to something I'm very passionate about, helping people live free. And I ended up winding that down, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? I know I have other businesses I want to start. I know I'm still very passionate about freedom, especially in the realm of education and career. But I was kind of like burned out after a 8-year period of doing a couple startups, one successful, one not successful. And I was like, yeah, maybe I'll do some consulting, some whatever. And this opportunity came to me from a good friend of mine, Jared Fuller. And he's like, you got to help me start this business in the B2B SaaS partnership space, which is like it's basically like people that work at software companies and post on LinkedIn all day, right? Like, yeah. And I'm thinking, LinkedIn was my version of hell, right? I was like, I like the idea of starting a new business with you. There's some skills that I have that overlap, but I don't know this market, and this isn't really connected to anything that I'm deeply passionate about. Anyway, he's kind of pitching me on this, and the vision for because fundamentally as an entrepreneur, I get excited about opportunity and things that are changing in the world. So he's pitching me this vision of what's happening in this particular niche of the economy, and why right now there's this really interesting window of opportunity to do something that very few people recognize. And so he convinces me of the opportunity, and I'm telling my wife, I'm like, this seems like the best opportunity for me right now. And I think it will be successful, but I feel like part of me would die a little bit. And she was like, well, maybe that's just your pride. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, basically your whole career, you've done things that are directly connected to your passion for freedom. And you get some strokes from that, from other people, right? It's like if you work for the Red Cross, everyone's going to be like, oh, you're such a saint, right? And she's like, is there anything bad about this business? I'm like, no. Like, would you truly hate it? No. it's not directly connected to like my sort of passion for liberty. She's like, so you're theoretically okay with that, but there's just something about it. She's like, maybe you just kind of like have a little ego in it. You just don't want to tell people, hey, what do you do? Oh, I work in a B2B SaaS partnerships. Oh, well, that's not exciting. I thought you were like a libertarian guy, right? And I was like, ow, I think she's kind of right. It's a little ego death. So anyway, I ended up taking the opportunity. So until about 6 months ago, that's what I was doing. For 2.5 years, we built this company, we got acquired, and then the company that acquired us also got acquired. It was the least connected to my passion and the things that I love. It was interesting and good work, but it was not like, this is where I want to put my heart and soul in the rest of my life. And yet it was the most economically successful thing I have ever done. Like it was very, very successful. The timing was right, had great outcome. And it turned out that was like exactly what I needed right then. In fact, it was actually kind of a nice relief to just be like, hey, I'm just in business, just selling people products that doesn't have an ideological component to it. So anyway, it was very interesting. And then through an unlikely chain of events, ended up back in the space of basically helping more people homeschool with the current company I'm with, Open Ed. But it was just one of those things where like you realize that, again, you can become a slave to your own reputation, to, the things that, yes, wives are amazing. They always just know. They always know. But anyway, like becoming a slave to, and in this world too, especially if you have an audience of any kind, a following, it's like, oh, what would they think? Oh, I can't tell them that they'll all be disappointed. And you can start to become trapped by that. So freedom is a constant fight for even just on the very personal level.
Okay, let's back up. Who is Isaac Morehouse, and like how do we know each other? And give us the quick intro, because you've worked at some companies that some of my listeners have heard of. In fact, I believe you founded one that went pretty well.
Yeah.
Driven by your passion to help people build freedom in their life.
100%. So I'm from Michigan originally, if you see the Detroit Tigers hat here. And, I grew up homeschooled and had a lot of freedom and a lot of responsibility from a very young age. Always working jobs and started a company when I was really young, flipped a house with some friends when I was like 16. So like very much kind of involved in having a life where I had a great degree of autonomy and control, more than I think a lot of people. And went to college and thought it was kind of a waste of money and questioning why everybody thought you needed to do it. Always very passionate about liberty, especially when I came across Frederick Bastiat, and then that led me to Ludwig von Mises and all of it. I think it's actually Milton Friedman was probably first when I was like 16, Capitalism and Freedom. And so, I was like, I want to make the world a freer, better place. I had done a lot of mission trips in my teens and seen like poverty, really some horrible stuff in some other countries, and been like, how do you not let that happen? Right. And try like asking these questions that a lot of people do, like what leads to that, and came to the conclusion that it's like the institutional structure people live under. And so I'm like, I want to make the world more free. Went into politics, worked in the state legislature for 3 years, realized that was absolutely not the way to go about it. That is the last in a long line of changes that come first. And that is the lagging indicator of changes that have already happened. And to quote somebody I met there, you can't save any souls at the Capitol. You can only lose your own. And so I got out of that. And then I started working for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, a free market think tank in Michigan, great organization. And I created kind of a college student, Students for a Free Economy, it was called, all over campuses, all over Michigan. We're bringing in speakers and just trying to get students interested in the ideas of freedom. And let me tell you, in 2007, that was like darn near impossible. 2008, it was like candy from a baby because Ron Paul came on the scene, and college students, people don't realize how amazing that was to have gone to college campuses all throughout the fall, having a booth, Students for a Free Economy in 2007, and trying to get people interested. What's a free economy? You mean like free stuff? Like what? I don't get it. Nobody knew what I was talking about. Nobody was interested. Very next year, 2008, the only thing that had changed was this Ron Paul campaign. Every campus I show up at, people are flocking the booth. They wanted t-shirts that said, freedom. I can't remember all the different, we had all these crazy t-shirts and stuff. And they were like, oh, free economy. Is that like Ron Paul? It was like unbelievable what that did at that grassroots level. But But anyway, I ended up moving to Washington, D.C. to work for the Institute for Humane Studies. I was running student programs for them. And you and I met at several conferences all throughout that, Atlas and SPN, all these organizations kind of doing this stuff. And my wife and I, when we moved to DC, we were like, we hate DC, but this is a great job opportunity. We're going to put a 3-year limit on it. And no matter what happens, we are moving out of DC in 3 years. And we wanted to leave Michigan anyway. So we were kind of like, where do we want to move next? We're looking at different places. And ended up first I started in programs, but then I was doing fundraising there. And, we decided we're going to move to Charleston, South Carolina after just 2 years. And we went ahead and moved. And it was such a funny moment because this was like remote work was not a big thing back then. This was 15 years ago, almost 12, 13. And I didn't ask. I was like, if I ask them, can I work remotely? They'll say no. So I was like, but I know they like me and I'm doing a good job. So I just said, hey, by the way, we've got another child coming and we don't want to live in DC. So we're going to move, but don't worry. I'm still going to do my job. I'm still going to crush it. Everything will be fine. I'll come to DC once a month if I need to. And they were like, well, we'll have to talk about that. And I was like, okay, let me know when you want to talk about it. And then they never did. And then I'm like, hey, by the way, we're looking at houses. We're probably going to put in an offer. Oh yeah. We'll have to talk about that. Never did. And then a couple months later, hey, we're moving next month. It was like, I think they were afraid to say you can't do that because they were afraid that I would quit. And I would have. I would have. So anyway, so lived in Charleston for 10 years. It was amazing there. And then right when COVID hit, my wife had always kind of wanted to do like a farmstead thing. And we're like, let's just get out of the city. Let's get out of here. And Charleston was actually like, not Charleston itself, but Mount Pleasant where we lived was actually pretty fine during COVID. It wasn't really doing a lot of crazy stuff, but so we moved out to 20 acres in Tennessee and did the farmstead thing there. A lot of good, a lot of hard stuff. Anyway, without going on and on and on and on, we ended up moving a year and a half ago here to Florida where we are now for work-related stuff, which is no longer relevant. And as I was telling you when we first got on here, now we're kind of here in Florida and we're like, we don't love it. Like, how did we end up here? What did we do wrong along the way? Should we move again? Should we stay? So anyway, that's my story in a nutshell. But I started the company Praxis after IHS. I left IHS to start a company. I left the nonprofit world. I was like, I'm done with this. I don't want to work in these nonprofits. The incentives aren't great. The feedback loops are too slow. So I started a company called Praxis, an alternative to college, which is still going. I no longer run it, but I ran that company, built it up. And then I started another company, which I ran for 3 years. It just never got off the ground. And then I started another company, which I mentioned, which did really well. And now here I am today. So that was probably a little too rambly for you, but
no, I think it's perfect. It's a journey. And, as we build the life we choose, I go back to more and more understanding that life's a journey helps when you stopped eating tomatoes, but you're still growing tomatoes on your homestead, why you need to stop growing those tomatoes. Otherwise, you keep growing tomatoes because that's what you've always done. It's like storing grain in your pantry when you don't eat bread anymore.
Yep.
Like, why do that? But
autopilot and inertia.
Yeah. But so Discover Praxis was like, I think that was one of a very brilliant idea to reach people who are just coming out of high school, don't quite like the gap year is really popular now.
Yep.
Don't know if they want to go to college or not. They're already suspecting that college may not be worth the juice may be worth the squeeze on that one, unless you want to be like a doctor or something of that nature. And even then I'm questioning it, but
yeah.
Your program that you put together, what I like about it is it focused on something that you did when you set up a situation where you could work remotely, which was provide so much value to your employer that they can't afford to let you go. Like that you prove, like you set it up rather than the other attitude, which is put in the minimum, get paid for my hours and go home.
Yeah. I remember I had this epiphany as I was doing fundraising. I was meeting with all of these, self-made millionaires, sometimes even billionaires. And I always took the opportunity to just like interview them and ask them about how did they start their company and all these things. I loved it. And which is probably what made me good at fundraising, by the way. I didn't just sell the programs all the time. I was actually interested in their lives. And so I was like, every person I would ask this question about their business, what is your biggest constraint to growth? Every single one had the exact same answer. They all said people. I just can't find enough good people. And I don't care what my website says, I'm always hiring if there's somebody that's good. And at the same time, this was like 2010, 11-ish. So you still had like, people were still blaming the housing crisis of 08, 09 and saying like, oh, well, the economy's bad. So I'm working with all these young people who are graduating, or maybe they're even getting a master's degree. And they're like, oh, nobody's hiring. There's no jobs. So I guess I'll go back to school again so I can defer paying my student debt to go get another degree. And I'm like, you all say nobody's hiring. All the businesses owners say, I can't find anybody. I'm like, something is going on here. There's like an expectation mismatch. And I thought part of the problem was all these people with these degrees, and especially advanced degrees. And like the smarter and more academically successful you are, the greater the gap between what you think your market worth is and what it actually is. So it's like this weird tragedy that like the smartest people are the most delusional about where their value lies in the market. And so they end up going to like basically government sponsored stuff like academia and nonprofits and stuff because the market doesn't value them as much as they think they should be valued, at least not yet, right? They haven't figured it out. So anyway, I was like, all these people graduating with these degrees and they've learned nothing. There's nothing that made them more valuable to an employer during that 4 years, like almost nothing. Maybe they picked up a few skills or they learned a few things. And there's just a little bit of stuff, but that's like almost accidental to what's happening at college, right? It's like you're lucky if you gain any market value while you're there. It's not intentional. So I'm like, what if you just took somebody who is reasonably intelligent, reasonably hardworking, not like, some super genius. And if you just gave them like the basics, I mean, I'm talking like, hey, here's how you use Google Calendar and how you get on top of your email. Young people don't know this stuff. They're terrible at this stuff, right? Like,
I still don't know the email thing. I'm working on that this year.
Like, when do you CC? Like literal, like how not to be an idiot in the office type stuff. And you combine some basic skills, like, hey, maybe you can learn digital design, whatever you're into, right? Marketing, sales skills, whatever. And then 6 months, let's go to a company and say, will you hire this person for 6 months as an apprentice? And it's a real job. It's not an internship where they're just getting coffee, but you're going to only have to pay them like a very low wage. So it's like what we used to say to businesses was like intern level wages for entry level work. And we would screen them, we would get them all ready to go. And then we would support them during this 6 months as well. So they have ongoing training and support. And if they're struggling with something and you come to us and then, we can help them work with that. And so I'm asking these businesses, like, would you hire somebody if they didn't have a degree, if they were vetted and they were trained and whatever, and you only have to pay them, $15 an hour, I think it was at the time. And they were like, sure. And I thought there's no way on earth you could come out of that 6 months. Like if you had our 6 month boot camp where you build a personal website and you do, gain some skills, whatever. And then you have 6 months working at a startup, at a tech company was what we were mostly working with. There is no way you are less valuable at the end of that than you would be if you spent 4 years sitting in classrooms. And it turns out that was correct. And I'm like, this is a net cost of zero. You pay tuition, but you earn all of that back during this apprenticeship because it's a paid apprenticeship. So it's a 1 year net zero cost program at the end of which you have a personal website, a whole body of work, a portfolio, and 6 months work experience at a company. 96% of people got a job offer from that company at the end of the program, right? It's like, it's not that hard. It's not like the craziest thing. So this idea, people would kind of present like this college is not for everyone thing started to bubble up. And now it's much, much bigger, but back in 2013. But the way it was always presented was like, oh, well, there are smart people and people who are going to be successful in life and college is for them. But like for dumb people, fewer dumb people should go to college, right? Or else it was like college or you're a welder or a plumber. Skilled trades. And there's nothing wrong with the skilled trades. Those are great. You can make a ton of money there too and enjoy your life. But it was presented as like, that's the only thing. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Literally every job except for those that legally require a degree, you can get that job better, faster, and cheaper outside of college. This is like college is only good for a very small number of things. Unless you want it as a consumption good, it's a fun 4 year experience. If you've got the money, whatever, that's all fine. But in terms of the career component, it is the worst way to get almost every career. And I'm like, no, it isn't just welders and plumbers that shouldn't go to college. Literally almost no one should if you're purely assessing it from a career value standpoint. And anyway, that was kind of like my crusade and my mission. And I mean, we've had a blast with it. Practices. There's over 600 alumni now that have gone through the program. It's been a really fun thing to see. It's really rewarding now that it's 12 years later. I mean, I've got some people that have started businesses, people that have, job coaching in the early 90s. It was different, man. It was different. Early 90s, it was literally like, you come out of, if you have a degree, you go to Wall Street and you get hired. You know what I mean? Or that was maybe late 80s. But anyway, so it's been a ton of fun. Very, very rewarding.
Yep. Okay. So now you took that job that wasn't your passion, but you didn't hate it, and it was financially rewarding. And as a result of that job, you moved from Tennessee to Florida.
Yep.
What were some of the challenges in Tennessee? So you had your family living in, how many kids do you have again? Like
I've got 4.
4. Okay. And you were living on a farm in Tennessee, basically.
Yeah.
Living the dream.
Yeah.
What was hard about that, and what was awesome about that?
So this is where, basically up until we left Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, for Tennessee in 2020, my life felt like it was just up and to the right. Like every year was better than the year before in my career, financially, personally, in every way. It's like moving to cool places. Everything's going up and doing great. We make that move. And theoretically, I loved the idea of land and being out in the country and all those things. But I loved the low country. I loved South Carolina. It's a favorite place I've ever lived to this day. Very, very near and dear to my heart, although it started to get popular. And now there's like traffic and problems that didn't used to be there. Things like that I really dislike. Traffic makes me feel very unfree. But so it was like pretty much up until that point, everywhere we had moved, it had been because of either my job or something that I really wanted. And my wife was like fine with it, but it wasn't driven by her. And this was kind of like, she really wanted to do this. And I said, okay, it's not, I would probably stay here, but I get it. I also think it's kind of cool. And like, if you want to do this, let's do this. We had figured we would do this later in life, like get a farmstead somewhere, but she's like, I think maybe now is the time. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. I'll go with it. It was a really interesting mix of difficult and wonderful. So the wonderful things were I did love having the acreage and having free range chickens and a huge garden. And we planted a bunch of fruit trees. We're going to get an orchard going. And we, just being able to like go shoot guns in your backyard and go hunt and whatever. I mean, I'm not like a big hunter, but I liked that aspect of it. I liked I like being out away from things, not having traffic. And like, if it were not for our kids being at the ages they were at, I like the kind of solitude that it presents being out there. So those are some of the wonder, and there was a lot of great people that we met too. A lot of other like-minded people that like moved to Tennessee to do similar things, and finding people who just think deeply and the other people with kids, your kids' ages, who are not just like, get them to the best schools, get them on the best sports teams, and just like very shallow. It's hard to find people like that when you have a family. And in Tennessee, we found them, and that was really cool. The hard parts were, we were out in rural Tennessee, Dixon, and with the exception of those little pockets of people, here and there that were like us who had moved from other places, there's basically 2 kinds of people in Dixon who are native there. Meth heads and like morbidly obese people. I mean, it's like there's no in between. If you're skinny, it's because you're addicted to meth. It's like really very depressing in a lot of ways. Like you go to the Dollar General, you go to the Walmart, and it's tough. It's tough. And I'm not saying that like judgmentally looking down on people. Like, I mean, it's like a picture of multi-generational kind of like rural American decay in some ways. And there's like, there's a cultural component where it's like, we're 45 to an hour from Franklin or Nashville or whatever. And so we're here, we're like just going shopping, going to get groceries, whatever. Those were like depressing experiences. Coming from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, where everything's just beautiful. Everything's beautiful. The people are beautiful. Everybody's in good shape. Everybody's like thriving, at least on like a material level. To Dixon, we're like, honestly, there's a lot of suffering. It's like one of the highest per capita rates of addiction. Like recovery centers were one of the biggest businesses there. It's like, there's a lot of drug addiction, a lot of like deep, poverty and things like that. And so you kind of had that component, and for having kids who were, our oldest at the time, I think when we moved, he was 15 or 16. And we had, girls that were just coming up into middle school. They're getting to that age where they're getting a lot more social, and we're homeschooling. And my oldest went to the public school for a year, but he didn't like it. So we're like being around a lot of people and creating those social connections for them, friends and networks are really important. And you got to drive like 45 to an hour for homeschool classes and meetups and co-ops. And again, you can find good people, but it's a lot of work and a lot of driving. All of the local stuff, like my son worked at the local, coffee shop and pizza place and the gym. He worked at almost every local business there was when he was there. Those are kind of depressing places with people that have never gotten out of the town and probably won't. And a lot of them are struggling with some of the things that I mentioned, addiction and stuff. And so you're facing this where you're like, there's a depressing element to it too. I really didn't like the weather either. I got to be honest. I love sunshine and I love the coast. I felt kind of landlocked. Like I like the ocean and I like the sun. It was a lot grayer than I thought in Tennessee and a lot colder, longer winters. So there was that a little bit, and kind of like there were struggles there. Like everything was a lot of work. I feel like this is going to sound sort of weird, but the culture and the land impact each other. And in South Carolina, the land is like harmonious with people. It's not trying to kill you. It's like this kind of pleasant, the tides come in and they go out, and the weather, it gets hot, but everything's kind of like, and people have this like romantic, symbiotic relationship with the land. Tennessee, kind of similar to Michigan where I'm from, the land hates you and wants you dead. And people have like an antagonistic relationship. Like, oh, rain, that means half of my hillside is going to wash away and my house might wash away with it. It's like something as simple as rain means like flooding every time, like half the state's eroding into the Mississippi River at any given time. Right. And like it's like this harsher kind of environment. And there's like a harsher culture too. Like people just are kind of like not as polite, a little bit uncivilized, a little bit uncouth. Like I just, the number of times coming from South Carolina, people hold the door for you all the time. And that's how I grew up. Like you hold the door for ladies if they're going to go through. The number of times, like even at places like church, where people like cut in front of my wife and like my kids and like bump them out of the way to like go out the door, just not even noticing it, because it's kind of like a harsher hillbilly culture, right? So like there were funny things like that. That's like a huge deal. But where there are times where, as our kids got older, I'm like, do I want my kids to grow up out here really isolated, where most of the people that are within close distance are kind of in a sort of depressing state, kind of stuck in a rough place? Besides, again, those people, you have to be very intentional and drive very far to find. And so that played into, so when this opportunity, my company got purchased by another company, and they wanted us to set up a headquarters, US headquarters. It was a French company in St. Pete, Florida. And we were coming down and visiting. Loved the weather. The sunshine made me really happy, especially during the Tennessee winter. And we're like, big area, lots of opportunities, lots of homeschool stuff. I mean, there was a lot of homeschool stuff in Tennessee too, but again, with the driving. And I was going to have to come down here like probably 1 week out of the month, back and forth all the time, and homeschooling and helping with the kids a lot. That would be really hard on my wife. So we kind of just weighed all the pros and cons, and we're like, maybe this is the opportunity, the door opening for us. Maybe we just need to move and do it. So we did. And now I wish we wouldn't have, to be honest. I'm not a person that has a lot of regrets, but I'm like, that was a mistake. Especially because after less than a year, the company got acquired again, and it turns out I didn't need to be here for work. I didn't know that. I couldn't have known that ahead of time, but now it's kind of like we're stuck here. And I'm like, we had our 20-acre farm. Now it had its problems and issues. It was kind of like, it wasn't the ideal vision of a farm I wanted. It had a lot of things that I wanted, but it was like on like a country highway. Like, so you weren't like looking out your front there was a pond in the front, but there's also this road and big trucks would drive by. And like, there were things about it that were like, this isn't like the dream land that I want for the rest of my life. I was still thinking about a different piece of land somewhere, but it had a lot of things. And the biggest thing is, and I'll stop rambling, I don't like Florida, at least not this part of it, which surprised me because I love the weather. I don't mind the heat. I like the beach, but culturally, this is a very hard place to live. At least the suburbs that we're in the Tampa area, in terms of finding people who have that depth that I talked about. This is a very shallow, rat racy place in my experience. For other families with kids, it's like and we're close to IMG Academy, which is this famous place where people go, they send their kids if they want to be pro athletes. And so that's probably part of it. There's this heavy culture around like very, very competitive sports, and everybody's in like club sports and went like there's endless sports seasons and private lessons and whatever. Everything's very like competitive, it's like traffic all the time. As soon as a new Target opens up, it's just like packed to the gills. Like everybody's like FOMO. It's just like mass commercialized society. And I don't object to that philosophically. I'm a free market capitalist. But personally, I'm like, man, this sucks. I miss the country. I really do. And I've been disappointed that the people, the other homeschoolers and people at church that we found don't like, they're very normie. Like, I don't know what the kids would say, blue pilled. Like it's kind of whereas like out in Tennessee, it was much easier to find more radical people, even in South Carolina, people who just thought differently, who were like being more deliberate about the way they constructed their lives. Here, it's like everybody just does what everybody else does. That's been the experience so far. So all that to say, like these trade-offs are hard. You want to go homestead and whatever. If you got kids who are at the early teen stage, that's very hard. That has some serious downsides. But then again, so do the suburbs. So I don't know. I can't tell you what the answer is, but I know my wife and I are like, like we're trying to decide. Should we move back to South Carolina? Should we, what do we do? What do we do? And I don't want to keep uprooting my family all the time because that's really hard too. But we're in an interesting spot. So that was a very long monologue. I'm so sorry, Nicole.
No.
It's like counseling session today.
No, that's what we're doing here. So that's literally the point of Tuesdays. So what's interesting about that is I think you liked a lot of things about Tennessee. We didn't really cover much of that, but you went pretty deeply into culturally where your struggle was, where you were at.
Yeah.
And it had to do with people you were interacting with. Like you had this dichotomy of some of the deepest relationships I've had in my adult life paired with a lot of depressing addiction-based issues in local population and not wanting those habits being instilled in your kids, right?
Yes.
Because once you're on that road, it's harder to get off that road the further down you go. Like we have people in our community who were meth addicts who are not anymore. But they had to like have some major fortitude to make that happen. And so you moved to another location, and what you're observing there is you don't have the deep relationships. Do you have those addictive elements in your immediate area?
Well, that's what's funny. And the trade-offs are not always this extreme, because I know growing up in the suburbs of a small town in Michigan and then living in the suburbs of Charleston, it was not as extreme, but there still is some truth to this generally. Out in the country, the kind of negative elements are visible. Like you see, somebody's rusted out car sitting on their front lawn, literally. It's like out for everybody to see the struggle or the dysfunction or whatever. It's very apparent. Here in the relatively affluent suburbs, everything looks great on the surface. All of my neighbors' houses are beautiful. Their lawns are beautiful. There's no rusted out cars or attack dogs chasing you down or, houses that look like meth houses. But to borrow a phrase from the Bible, it's like a whitewashed tomb. Like there's something rotten inside too, often, not always. And so people are driving their beautiful SUVs and doing their stuff that looks great on the surface, but there's often a lot of dysfunction underneath that like a spiritual vacancy, almost like a hollowness to it. And it's just a really interesting contrast to see, even just for my kids, noticing ways that they're probably not even aware of. We went from Mount Pleasant where they were like, oh, how come we don't have a boat? And we lived in a beautiful place. I'm like, well, we don't have a boat, whatever. It's not a big deal. They weren't like complaining, like, oh, they were aware of it. We moved to rural Tennessee and they were so grateful because all of their friends, all the people we know, they were like, you guys are so rich. You have a swimming pool and you have like a nice house. And they like felt, they didn't beg us and ask us for stuff like almost ever when we lived in Tennessee. And they almost felt like we have the nicest house. We're doing well. Now we move here and it's like right back to that. How come we don't have a golf cart? Hey, what can we, let's go to the mall and buy the Lululemon or whatever. And I've got teenage girls, right? It's like their milieu, the girls here, that's all they kind of care about is like the Stanley mug and the Lululemon and the whatever. And even just seeing that, the subtle ways that conditions them, I'm like, I don't like that. On the one hand, out there in rural area, I want them to know that their world is bigger. Cause I saw some older teen girls in our circles who were graduating high school, and they were like amazing, really cool, high quality people who were like dating some loser locally because that was the only person they had met. And they were going to end up not knowing how much more they could do. And I'm like, oh, I don't want that for my kids. On the other hand, I come here and it's like, oh, okay, well, you find somebody who's like really attractive and successful, but they have no soul, right? So I'm like, I don't know. It's a really hard thing to think through when you're trying to find something for your kids. I do not recommend moving as much as we have moved. I think that was really disruptive for the family.
Well, that's just a very military approach to your life, right?
I think until your kids are like 6, 7, 8, before you have kids and until you have kids that are getting to even 10 and under, move around and figure out where you want to be. Totally. But once you're kind of like, hey, the kids are getting to that stage where like they need a stable social circle and they need to know this neighborhood, this town, it's mine. I'm the king of it. I can ride my bike all around. I know where everything is. I know where the little alleys are in the paths. I know they need to feel that sense of mastery over the place where they live. And like, this is like, I'm the king of this town, whatever. And just always being the new person, always like that's hard. I think leaving Mount Pleasant was hard enough at like kind of a crucial time, but they were young enough where it was like, okay, but then moving again from Tennessee, and the kids didn't love Tennessee. They didn't love it. None of them are country kids. They didn't like the farm stuff. They didn't care about animals and raising. My wife and I always tried to get them to, and they didn't care. They wanted to do like normal suburban kid stuff and go hang out with their friends. So that was part of the challenge too. But then moving again. So anyway, I think it's just, there's always trade-offs. And it's not perfect. When you become a parent, you just realize like you have to do your best for your kids and not overlook what they need, but you also can't beat yourself up too much either. Like I have to try to tell myself my kids are resilient. Yes, maybe it was a mistake that we moved here or whatever, but like I can't wallow in that. I got to think about what
why
do we
do you
do
think it's a mistake you moved there?
I don't know if I can say that for sure, because in fairness, my oldest son, who I think was struggling a lot when we were in Tennessee, he's doing amazing. He's thriving now. He's, he's kind of on his way. He's like, I think this was actually really good for him moving down here. But the other kids, not awful, but like nobody's like really super happy or super thriving here yet. We've only been here a year and a half, but I just like didn't know how much my soul needed that land and that space and I'm like, I have a beautiful home with like a pool, a 2-story lanai with a pool and a hot tub overlooking a pond and all the stuff that like, if you're in the suburbs, this is it, man. This is the best way to live in the suburbs. But I'm like, but I want to be able to walk for acres and acres on my own land. I want to be able to go like shoot guns out my backyard and not like drive 40 minutes through traffic to some gun range and fill out paperwork for forever and wait. And I don't even shoot guns a lot, but just like the ability to do that. I just love that. You know what I mean? I love being like, this is my land. You can't tell me what to do. I want chickens wandering around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. My wife and I
interesting because you have all the elements of what you want. And I'm sure if you sat down with your wife, a lot of them would overlap. And you have some clear elements of what you don't want.
Yes. And moving so much has helped me learn things that I really don't want. Living in DC for 2 years, honestly, that was an amazing way to be grateful. Like when we moved to Mount Pleasant, I felt like the king of the world. I'm like, this is amazing. My quality of life on the same amount of money is so much higher. But we learned, like we forced ourselves to find ways to make friends and find connections in DC. My wife is a master at figuring out how to go plug in and find new social circles and find activities for the kids and whatever when we move. She should start like a coaching service helping people do that because she's truly amazing. But we have learned a lot. You don't always see it until you leave, where you're like, oh, I get it now, right? When you're there, the things you don't like, but you don't always realize the things that you love until you don't have them anymore. You're kind of like, oh, I just thought that was normal. But some communities.
Well, this is cool. I wonder if it's my internet or his. So it looks like we've had a bit of an internet glitch. So bear with us. It's probably mine because, when it rains in Tennessee, sometimes the internet. Are you back?
I'm back.
Did I
Yeah.
go out or did you go
No,
out?
it was probably me. I literally pay for the theoretically like the fastest internet you can get. It's supposed to be like 5 gigs, whatever, and it freezes all the time. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. So you can be really successful in life and still be like, I'm not sure I live where I should live or my life is built the way I want it to be.
yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of people feel this tension. People who maybe live in suburban areas or whatever, where you have a lot of the things you like in terms of, a lot of people, a lot of opportunities socially and things like that. But you have that desire to do the homestead thing and to do but you got kids who have friends, whatever. Like, I think that's a real tension, and knowing that you don't want to be isolated. But then again, sometimes you can be socially isolated, even if you're around a lot of people, So this is the first time in my life where I have had any sense of, maybe I took a wrong turn somewhere. I'm not sure. I've always just been like, nope, everything's been up and to the right and it's been amazing and let's go. But I think Tennessee got into me a little bit, and now I'm a little sad to have left it.
Yeah. Well, you can always have 2 places you live.
That's very much in my mind. Like, I want that land. I want that long-term, like, hey, this is where we're going to, when the kids get older and move out, and we can get that property, start building a house there, while we stay here for the time being. So I think we're kind of thinking that way.
That's the way you're leaning right now.
Yeah, I think so. And just like, as my parents get older, we want them to move in with us when they're too old to take care of themselves. And so we would like to have a piece of property that can accommodate that better. And so we're kind of like, all right, whether we're here for a year or two, whether we're here for 5 years, this is not where we're going to be forever. And so let's kind of start planning and plotting for where do we want that to be, and get the land first, get the land and the location first. And then we can worry about, building the house and the homestead.
Yeah, the question of place when people are building they're choosing the life, right, can be a big one. Some people it's natural. They grew up in Dixon, they stay in Dixon for the rest of their life. Like, I think of Dawn Gorham, who I think she grew up in Camden, Tennessee, and she's in Dixon now, and she is a firefighter, go-getter, fighting back on chicken regulations sort of lady, building this cool homestead, right? Like, she's got a raw milk cooperative now and all this stuff. And she really likes that place. Like, she's connected with that place. I've only heard you mention South Carolina about 500 times on this conversation. I'm just going to throw out that observation. You can do with it what you will, because obviously you have to make your own decision, but you've gotten good and bad from different locations, and you may already have your solution on place.
Yep.
I don't know. For sure. Like, that's a also husband and wife decision where everybody has to be on the same page. But then if you back out and say, okay, what are the characteristics of what we want to build? That may inform place a little bit better. But a lot of people get so stuck on place, they struggle to build the things into their life that they need. Like, you need deep connections with friends.
Yes.
And that seems to be missing for you there.
Yep. Yeah. And like, I've got deep connections with friends all over the country, except for where I live.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is the first time I've had that before. It's not that they're not here. I'm sure I can find them. I keep working at it. It's only been a year and a half, but it's been harder than anywhere else I've lived to find that.
Yeah. So then the question is, can you build some of that there or not? Or do you have to depend on your other friends all over the country? Don't know.
Yeah. And I don't know the answer to that. I'm curious if others have since you moved out to Tennessee, did you go through any phase where you questioned whether you were in the right place?
That's a great question. I've been here 18 years.
And have you been there that long? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Did you know me before I moved from Portland? I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is my 18th. I'm like just starting the 18th year in Tennessee. And I absolutely loved living in North Portland. Like, I had a house in the city with enough land to grow things on. I had a giant pear tree. Apparently I was already becoming a homesteader there and didn't know it. I was organizing the community to harvest the pears, to turn it into pear juice, to ferment into cider. And then we all got to like have some. And at the same time, I was part of the gentrification, quote unquote, problem there. We were cleaning up the crime and the litter and all of that stuff because we wanted to have a nice place to live, basically. Everybody, that's what people want. Even people in less nice places to live, like you basically want to have a nice, safe place to live.
Yes.
And what I didn't like was the cultural pressure in Oregon, because it's one of the most racist places I've ever lived in my life.
Interesting.
Yeah, and by which I don't just mean skin color. It's also classist. So under the guise of not being racist and not being classist, they've set up an infrastructure that's more racist and more classist than anything I've seen.
That Washington, D.C. felt very much. One of our daughters is adopted and she's Black. And like South Carolina never had anything at all. No, like one of the most integrated, least racist places I've ever been. Washington, D.C. was bad.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I lived in Silver Spring for a while. So
yeah.
Remember.
So you felt that the cultural thing wasn't doing it for you, even though you had a beautiful setting.
No, and when I came to Tennessee, it was like, oh, there are some people who are racist here, and you know exactly who they are.
Yes.
And mostly people are just trying to live their life as best they can. And same thing, I ended up, it took me about 2 years to start having deep connections here. And in this area, it took me really 6 to 8 years to get past the "you're not from here, are you?" I mean, they'll still ask me that question because obviously I talk like I talk. But you know, it was at first it was like we're a little suspicious of you, and then they're like, "You're our cute little pet from Oregon now." You know, that's the deal. And I'm sure I piss people off here because I don't have to care about the long-standing family connections when there's somebody being an ass, and I can just call him an ass. And then they're like, "I wouldn't call him an ass because Freddie Sue's mom's brother is my cousin," you know, and I'm like, not mine. So I'm just going to say stop acting like an ass. So there's some power in that. I would say probably around 2015, 2016, I'd been homesteading since 2007 or 8 in that area. And I live on a homestead in a 1,200 square foot bunker that is not the kind of house I would wish I live in. Would like a nicer house with more light, with more natural building elements, like a lot. And I've always had that before. And on a piece of land that's very hard to scrape homesteading living out of in a lot of ways. But by implementing permaculture practices here, it's gotten way better. And every year it gets a little bit better. And then every time I invest more in that, I'm like, it's really hard to leave because of the sunken cost fallacy.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. But there was a time when I started looking at all other homestead or land house combinations that could turn into a homestead in the area. And I almost stretched. I didn't have any money for a $400,000 place. And then didn't. And then I had a big financial crash the next year personally when I transitioned out of Spark Freedom. And I was really glad I didn't also have a really expensive mortgage. Even though it would have been great to have all that extra land that had some flat areas. Like imagine putting fencing in where it's flat. I don't even know what that's like. And no rock. And at some point, what I came to is I've always felt a strong connection to this place where I am. Like from the time picture this, Isaac, you drive up on this place. There's broken glass and garbage everywhere. The weeds are taller than your head. You walk into the house that's for sale. It's listed as land only for a reason. You walk into the house that's for sale and half of it's not usable and the plumbing doesn't work.
Wow.
And you say to yourself, I really like the energy here. I think I'll buy it. That's how I got this place, like low ball offer. And to this day, we are still pulling like random crap out of place. Like you'll just like in the soil, you'll be like, it's a socket set.
We had a little bit of that. We had this area back in the woods where it took me a while before I realized it was like somebody had pushed it over with a bulldozer. I started digging and there was just the most random assortment. It just kept going and going. It was like a large area. Like just you wouldn't know it was there. Like I'd see a little are those some glass bottles? Is that like a baby doll head? What is that? And you start digging and you're like, just this cache of random stuff in there. So
Yeah.
I totally, it's funny that I have to have this little anecdote. I know we got to wrap it up here, but we were talking about like the racism sort of thing. So, growing up in Michigan, like if you meet racist people, they're like, oh, I don't like Mexicans or black people or Asians. And they like really haven't met any. Washington, D.C., like maybe they have had hostile encounters with the people they don't like. They have met them, but they've never met them in any kind of friendly environment. South Carolina, it was like, for the most part, at least where we lived, I'm sure in hillbilly areas, it's different, like way out in the middle of nowhere, but like in the Charleston area, really, there wasn't any of that. Like it was pretty integrated. Tennessee, this was the funniest thing ever. My son went to the public high school there for a little bit. People would say the most racist stuff you'd ever heard. And they'd be like, oh, like I hate, black people or Mexicans or whatever. And then 2 minutes later, you'd find out that like their dad was mixed and their cousin was Mexican. Like everybody was like related to someone from a different race, but and they actually weren't in practice like super racist because they all knew people and had like relatives and friends, but they would just say things that on their face, or they'd have like a Confederate flag. And you'd be like, oh my gosh, they must be super racist. Or one guy, my son worked at a gym. He literally would come in. He had a swastika tattoo. And my son finally asked him, he's like, so what's the deal with that? Are you like a Nazi? He was like, no, that was a mistake. I got that when I was younger. And he was like the nicest guy ever. But so in Tennessee, I learned
it into a fashionable circle.
You got to do something with it. I learned in Tennessee that like, you cannot take what people say or the shirts that they wear or whatever at face value, because they will sound so closed-minded and racist, but turns out that they have like an interracial marriage or family or whatever. And they actually, it was such a strange, experience.
Yeah, it is a very different culture here and everywhere. And that is actually an argument for getting out and going different places, especially if you're at this place where you're like, I haven't settled on place yet. That's an argument for renting for a year.
Yes.
Like we got somebody moving into base camp, the rental I own next door. We have people moving out, somebody moving in from the network. And I've seen her live in 4 or 5 different places in the last 3 years, I think. And that's great, because what she didn't do was put her life savings into something that's now hard to sell.
Yes. Yep.
And that's a big, so I think when you're looking at building that sense of place, it's not a waste of money to rent. It's hard to rent when you have dogs or whatever, but it can be. But yeah.
And I think it's getting easier as interest rates are getting higher and it's getting harder for people to buy. A lot of people who are sitting on low interest rate properties are like, well, I don't want to sell it now, because then if I buy, but they're renting in the amount. I think the rental market is going to get more flexible and there's going to be more options there. But yeah, I agree. I'm a huge fan of it. When we first moved to Mount Pleasant, we rented for like 5 years, rented a house before we decided, okay, we're going to buy. And we knew the area really well. We knew exactly where we wanted a house to be and what we wanted. I'm a big fan of that. If you can do it, if you can spend some time renting in an area before you plop down money, like in Dixon, honestly, if we could have just transported our property there to be on a different road than it was on, it would have been like a dream property. But it was like being on that really busy road. And we just didn't know when we bought it that it was such a busy highway with like trucks going by all the time. And like, you just don't know stuff like that until you're in a spot. So I think that's a great way to ease in. I mean, I know you're always playing games and trying to time the market and interest rates and guess. And all. In my experience, you cannot optimize for guessing what the market's going to do. Just focus on what you can control and don't like think that you're going to like win the timing game, because you don't know.
Yeah. My biggest mistake here is I should have bulldozed this house and built a new one, and it would have cost me less than fixing this house. That's and I told Tactical, who lives on the property here, I was like, next time I have a fundamental structural problem with this house, I'm going to embrace that it is a sunken cost fallacy and it is time to bulldoze the house. And it's going to be really freaking unpleasant for me to go live in a camper while I build a house.
Well, what you got to do then, you've got this great community, this great audience.
Yeah.
Have a giant party, do a GoFundMe where if you hit, $50,000, you will literally blow it up with like dynamite and have like a giant house explosion party where everyone comes and like gets their beer and, somebody gets the old fashioned, you press down come on, you could put
TPE. Yeah, that's really my run. So I think sometimes you always have regrets, but in the aggregate, I am building the life I want. And the older I get, the easier it is to say no to the things that are tempting, that
Yes.
take me off path. So
Yes.
it's interesting. I feel like we should do these kind of talks more regularly, Isaac.
Yeah, I agree. And just for anybody out there, like, I don't want to be misunderstood as complaining. I mean, Dixon is a wonderful place. Where I live now is a wonderful place. I really have a good life. Like, I'm complaining about higher levels of self-actualization. Let's be honest. I'm not suffering in some crazy way. But when you start to realize all of the options that are available to you and all the freedom you have to construct your own life, and when you have constructed and tried different versions of that, you really start to be like, dang, I really did like that. And I don't know about this. And that's okay. But it can also torment you too much too. Like, relax. You're never going to get it perfect. You're going to live in a place that has some things that you don't like, and try to embrace the absurdity. Like, you know what? This crazy, stupid, lovable town, right? Like, this crazy, stupid property that can't grow anything but weeds. Like, embrace a little bit of the absurdity and the humor. I had to remind myself of that too, just to come back to that. When I'm sitting in traffic, when it's boomer season and all the snowbirds come down from New York and they're acting like jerks at Costco and whatever, I have to like pretend I'm in a Seinfeld episode and laugh. Otherwise I'll start to go crazy and be like, why did we move here? You know what I mean? So I'm learning too.
All right. Well, on that note, any last words before we wrap up?
No, this has been a ton of fun. And, I guess we turned it into a therapy session for me, but keep up the great work, Nicole. You're just knowing you're out there doing this and helping other people do it. It gets me excited. I love it.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate you making time to be on the show. We'll get you back on soon and see how things are going, and maybe dive into some of the coaching things you've done for people. Cause I know, like you like I have discovered that coaching people doesn't pay the bills very much, but you do it anyway, naturally.
I do it because I love it and I can't help doing it. Yeah.
Guys, check out Isaac Morehouse. It's isaacmorehouse.com, right?
Yeah.
Morehouse. That's something I used to spell wrong all the time. So isaacmorehouse.com to see what he's up to. If you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in two ways. Get your chocolate covered espresso beans at hollowroast.com. And consider becoming a member. You can find out more about that at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.